Recording is officially in progress. So, first off, thank you everybody for jumping in to the first meeting of the Western Canada user group. Obviously, we are happy to have you no matter where you're from, be that Eastern Canada like Leah, or all the way over in Switzerland like our friend Sammy who's joining us there. This is definitely not content that is going to be focused on, hockey and growing wheat. So it will be applicable no matter where you're hailing from or where you happen to be watching this right now. So I'll get a screen share going in just a second, but I kind of want to unpack what the focus of today's user group is. What I really want to cover, and you'll learn a little bit more about how this applies to my background in just a second, is just some really tactical things that people can use, whether they're HubSpot admins, HubSpot partners, or just HubSpot users, to kind of identify common issues that I see in HubSpot. Now, we're not going to get into solutioning out all of these potential problems today, but I'm trying to give you guys avenues that you can look down for common issues that people run into when using HubSpot. There's a lot more, and there are different approaches to doing this exact same thing. Talk to 100 different HubSpot consultants. You're going to find 100 different specific methods for running down and troubleshooting inside HubSpot. This really is just, my method for going about this, and we're going to get as far as we can down that road before we run out of time here today. And at the end, hopefully I'll feel free, fire some questions in as things go along. If there's anything you want me to spend a little bit more time on or circle back to, I will be sharing one of my screen, so I won't necessarily see the chat the whole time, but I am going to be jumping back and forth across a couple of different tabs. So like I say, I'll try to check in periodically there. All right, let's get my screen share going. And I'm just going to share I'm going to share the window. I'm going to share this. Perfect. I'm just going to do a quick double check. Excellent. You guys are seeing the presentation. Awesome. So, how to diagnose account issues with a HubSpot Health Check. Again, HubSpot Health Check is just the term that I apply, my little branding term for my process of investigating a HubSpot account. But all we're going to be doing is looking at, how to deal with common issues that pop up in a HubSpot account and how to identify them. Today's agenda, our intros and tech issue buffer. Luckily, we didn't have any tech issues, so we're off to a good start. Now, we're basically going to break it up into 3 chunks, kind of basic setup checklist, objects and properties, and email lists and forms. The basic setup checklist, this is just going to be stuff like you'll see in a moment, things like the tracking code, domain setup, just common things that people often, do when they're setting up a new HubSpot account and how those can sometimes, not get done correctly or get left off when initially setting up an account. Objects and properties, this is going to be getting into the nitty-gritty of, hey, how do we adjust our layouts in HubSpot? How do we go about deleting properties? How can we figure out whether, a certain thing is causing problems? And then emails, lists, and forms. Again, some of the most common places that we see clutter inside HubSpot accounts and how we can look at kind of wrangling that in. And then we'll wrap up with a little bit of thank you and hopefully a few questions. So I've been nattering at you for about 4 minutes now, and I still haven't introduced myself. So I am Cody Pearson. I run a little 2-person HubSpot consulting company based in Winnipeg, Manitoba, here in Western Canada, called Hubcap Solutions. I've been doing HubSpot pretty much exclusively for 3 years, but I've been working in it extensively for about 6. So started working in agency life, got a real taste for HubSpot as a platform, really enjoyed working with the clients and with the tool, and then decided to specialize. And then my biggest milestone was about almost 6 months ago now. My wife joined me as my business partner full-time. So that's how we went from being a 1-person operation to a 2-person operation. And then at the end, I always like to give them my, what I don't do as much as what I do. I'm definitely not a general marketing agency. I don't write Google ads. I don't write social posts. I don't develop websites. I'm a HubSpot consultant through and through. And this ties back to why this topic was something that I really wanted to touch on, because there's a lot of content out there about how to use HubSpot big picture strategically. Where I live and play and love to be is just deep into the weeds of the platform, helping people solve those little mechanical problems that actually impede you from reaching those grander strategic goals. So stuff that we're going to be covering in today's agenda is stuff that I have seen, in my own account, in other accounts, time and time again. Speaking of, I am going to be trying to jump back and forth and show you guys stuff in platform as much as possible. Now, having said that, I do use probably a lower tier of HubSpot than you might be expecting a HubSpot consultant to do for my own business because we're pretty small. So there are some things that I won't be able to show you in my platform, which is where I have taken some snips of other people's accounts. And like a fine episode of Law and Order, I have changed the names to protect the innocent. So chung chung, let's get ourselves rolling. All right, basic setup checklist. Like I said, so the HubSpot tracking code. This is definitely, it's literally the first thing on most people's to-do list when they get started with HubSpot. But even then, it can cause some problems, or it not being set up correctly can cause some problems. You need the tracking code installed in order to actually, when people submit forms on your website, to capture and map their website viewing history to their actual contact in HubSpot. So if that isn't set up, it's going to cause a real problem for you. So there's just a couple of quick ways you can go about cross-checking whether your tracking code has been installed correctly. So I am going to I'm going to re-screen share. I'm just going to share my entire screen because I think that's going to be easier for jumping back and forth. So, like I said, settings, define your tracking code, tracking analytics, tracking code. So this is the actual code that you're going to be looking for to confirm that it's in place. There's a couple of ways I go about doing that commonly. The easiest, if I can type my own URL, is actually with this tool that I use, and I'm sure there's other versions of this out there. It's something called Built With. It's basically a free tool that scans a website for all of the plugins and apps and everything that somebody's using on the back end of a website. And if you put a URL in and you see this whole HubSpot usage statistics, that tells you that the HubSpot tracking code is in place on that page, or on that site, I should say. Now, some scenarios where this might be a problem. I've got an example where I worked with an international agriculture company. And what they had was and also a division of the US Navy that had this same problem, where on their website, they had a global header that was controlled by the central organization. So the individual user here in Canada, or of that specific location that I was working with in the case of the Navy, they could edit the content that was in this page, like in the template, but they couldn't affect the header of the website. So that meant that they had real trouble getting their HubSpot tracking code embedded in a place that it could be used consistently across the websites. That was a situation where figuring out how to correctly embed the tracking code and making sure that we got it on every page, or at least as many pages as possible, presented a real challenge for that client. So if you ever find yourself wondering why, I'm not seeing web page activity appear for people that I think I should be, it might be an issue with your tracking code. There we go. So I'm just going to make sure. Cool. Not seeing any issues in the chat. Awesome. Another element, place you can go is literally just your analytics. So if you go up to reports, analytics tools in your HubSpot account and look at the traffic analytics option, you should see an actual traffic map. So if you want to check inside your HubSpot account, if you don't see in your traffic analytics traffic, if you see none, that's an issue. Or if you see traffic that looks radically different from what you're seeing on something like Google Analytics, you might have issues with your tracking code. At which point you're probably going to need to reach out to your web developer to make sure that the tracking code is embedded in the right place. So literally, tracking code is always the first thing that I check when I'm doing a HubSpot health check. Domains, these are another initial setup item that can have some implications as you move through, particularly when it comes to email sending domains. So this is one that I can show you in my own account. So I'm going to pop over here. Again, we're up in settings. We're just going to go down to website. We're going to go down to domains and URLs. And so here you can see my own domain setup. So the most important one to check for most people that causes a problem without people realizing it causes a problem is the email sending domain. Basically, what this does, connecting an email sending domain, essentially gives HubSpot permission to send email as whatever domain you've connected to it. So in my case, hubcapsolutions.ca. HubSpot doesn't require you to connect an email sending domain in order to send email, but not having one connected can result in deliverability issues. Your emails are more likely to get caught up in spam filters if you don't have an email sending domain set up. Because what happens is then there's a little, mostly invisible from a user perspective notice that goes on your emails, which basically says this email was sent on behalf of hubcapsolutions.ca by basically a HubSpot mail server, which people don't like to see emails being sent on behalf of other people because that's basically what spammers do. So if you don't have an email sending domain added, or if you have one added but it doesn't have the green dot that says connected, again, you're going to want to connect with whoever manages your website domain and update your DNS records. And there's a whole tutorial on how to, if you don't have one connected, you can send the records over to your domain admin so they can get them added. But getting your domain set up, particularly email sending, the same process is for both primary and redirected domains. If you connect the primary domain, you need to use one to do blogs, landing pages, and websites. And you can connect the domain, and sometimes this will be what happens, is somebody adds a domain, but then nobody passes the DNS updates over to a website developer. So you end up with domains which sit here in your list, but aren't actually connected. So again, another thing that I'll often do when people want to publish content, or if they're having deliverability issues, is I'll pop in here, make sure that all the domains, you're not seeing any domains that are not connected, or that the connected domains match the domains that they actually want to publish things on. I've had clients where one side of the business, which used one email address, set up the instance and set up their email sending domain. And then the other side of the business wanted to use it to send out email. And then we had a little bit of a fight over, whose email sending domain are we going to have connected? Which one works best for both teams? So checking in on the domains, making sure everything that should be there is there, everything that is there is connected, and that you have an email sending domain. Two really quick, cross checks you can do. Ads accounts. This is another situation where people sometimes, and this can apply to social as well, they connect their advertising accounts over to HubSpot, but the connections break. So if we just take a look here at one from a separate client here, is we can see that they've got Facebook accounts connected, but all of these are showing, it's associated with that account, isn't connected. Update permissions, change the primary user, the user of the account isn't connected. So a lot of times what will happen with both social and ad accounts is that they were connected at some point, But because of users being removed from the system, either Facebook in this case or HubSpot, or the platforms just, a lot of times they'll have, every 3 to 6 months, you have to re-authenticate just so that those connections don't stay live in perpetuity. So with ads accounts, you do want to pop in and just check to make sure that all of those accounts are still connected. So back over to my own account here, marketing, ads. And so you can see right now I've got my own Google accounts, Google Ads account connected. This is what it should look like. It's active. You can see it was connected by me when it was connected. So this is what a healthy connected ad account should look like. But if you pop into this page and you see something that looks a little bit more like this, generally all you've got to do is, in your actions, there will be a reconnect button. And, you'll either be forced to re-give your connections if you're the one person that it was connected by, or it'll reconnect and then this account will be now connected by 2 people. And that's basically the both of the people who were responsible for making that connection in the first place. You can also obviously remove any accounts that aren't, that shouldn't be connected anymore. But yeah, so this is a common scenario where people will say, hey, I would really love to get a report on people who clicked on my ads or people who were added to HubSpot based on my lead syncing or my Facebook or LinkedIn lead forms. And then, oh, what do you know? We can't find those people in HubSpot as we'd expect to. The most common, reason is that those accounts just have timed out or somebody's been removed from one of the systems so that the account connection breaks. And then obviously we can't get the data we want inside HubSpot. Marketing contacts. So this is something that will probably apply to most of you, but might not apply to all of you because marketing contacts is a way that HubSpot has been billing for since I believe about like October of 2020. I think is when they first made the switch over, somewhere in that time. It's been a couple of years. But in the past, in HubSpot, what you would do is you would basically be charged for every contact in your database. Just you got 22,000 people in there. You're going to pay, whatever rate you've negotiated per 1,000 people for all 22,000 of those contacts. A couple of years ago, as HubSpot was growing into being a more, robust CRM and customer service platform, they realized that there were a lot of situations where people didn't want to pay for all the contacts that they would have in their database. You might want to have the accounts payable person in your HubSpot CRM because you need to talk to them about getting the bill paid, but they're probably not somebody that's going to be on your newsletter to get your content. So marketing contacts give us the ability to have people in our database that we're not charged for. So the people we pay for, marketing contacts. The people we don't pay for, non-marketing contacts. However, this flexibility does come with some billing considerations. Marketing contacts are generally sold in blocks of 5,000 instead of blocks of 1,000 like contacts used to be. And if you ever cross your marketing contact threshold, so say you're paying for 7,000 marketing contacts and you accidentally go up to 7,005, generally that will bump up your HubSpot bill to that next tier for the duration of your contract. So keeping an eye on your marketing contacts so you don't get any of those surprise, tier increases is really important for a lot of organizations. Now, I'm not on marketing contacts, so this is another one that we're going to have to do a snip of. But if you do go under your account and billing tab in HubSpot is where you're actually going to find the usage and limits tab. But if you go, account and billing, usage and limits, you're going to find this chart, which essentially tells you how many you're paying for. So your contact here is 37,000. How many of those people in your database are marketing contacts and how many total contacts you have in your database. So you can see with this client, as of a little less than a month ago, we did a pretty big project to cut down the number of marketing contacts that they were paying for, because they were up around 36.5 with a tier of 37,000. So at any moment, if they had ticked over that line, they would have ended up paying about an extra $3,500 a year. So getting this down, it makes it a lot easier to keep track of who you actually could and should and want to be communicating with, and it has that positive billing implication. So the other things that I've got right here is if you are in HubSpot, if you are paying on the marketing contacts billing method, there's two fields that I always tell people to pay attention to. One, marketing contact status, just tells whether a contact is a marketing contact or a non-marketing contact, or marketing contact until next update is any of yes. What this means, and the reason that this field exists, is because if you change somebody to a marketing contact, that change doesn't immediately to a non-marketing contact. My apologies. If you change somebody to a non-marketing contact, that change doesn't apply immediately. Generally, it'll wait until the first of the next month. So you can see again, this change happened on March 31st, but we had actually made this change about a week previous. So nobody actually changed from marketing to non-marketing until March 31st. The flip side, and this is always funny, is the flip side. It doesn't have that limitation. If I want to move somebody to from a non-marketing contact to a marketing contact, and you make the change, that of course applies immediately. So it's much easier to go from non-marketing to marketing than it is to go from marketing to non-marketing. And this marketing contact until next date update is any of yes, basically tells you all the people who are marketing contacts, but on the first of the month will change to no longer be marketing contacts. So with these two fields, you can get a really good view of how many people are actually in your, how many marketing contacts you have and how many might be looking to change within the next little while. So keeping an eye on marketing contacts, super important, but something that's easy to forget about, especially if people are adding contacts to your database through imports or integrations, places where you might not be keeping a really close eye on how many people are actually coming in, or when people might not understand the difference between a marketing or a non-marketing contact. Users and teams. This is kind of a catch-all. I'm gonna say, I have a snip here. Perfect. This is kind of a catch-all for one really common area that gets bloated in HubSpot is the management of users and teams. So I'm going to pop back over just to show everybody what I'm talking about. Account setup, users and teams. Again, we're in my account, so we're not going to see a whole heck of a lot of users. And it's basically me and my wife/business partner. And we're both super admins because there's only two of us in the account. But this is always something I check when I first start working in somebody's HubSpot account, because if keeping a handle on who has what kind of access is really important for understanding potentially in the future who might be making changes, how people want to use the system, or regulating external vendor access and things like that. So if I look into an account and I see that there are 15 users and 11 of them are super admins, I'm going to start asking questions of, does everybody who has that level of access actually need that level of access? Or could we potentially rein that in? Because the fewer super admins we have, the fewer people we have who could potentially do, real damage to the account. Another scenario is if I see a lot of users that haven't logged in a very long time. So you can see here, both Lisa and I were last active in the last 24 hours. If I see people who have last active several years ago, I'll ask the question, could we potentially remove the access from those people? Or are they even still with your company? Same thing, you'll see a lot of times there will be external, former vendors, as a HubSpot provider, where some other HubSpot partner was responsible for the initial setup or had worked with the account previously. And I'll be like, oh, do you still work with that company? Does their team still need access to your account? And if in any of those situations the answer is no, or we could potentially limit some of that access, then why not do it? It just gives us a little bit more peace of mind in the account. The other places that I'll look and call things out a lot of time when it comes to users and teams is seats. So under that same users and teams page, if the company is paying for any paid seats, you'll see a seats tab, which will tell you how many of those seats you have assigned. You would be surprised how many times I come into an account and find, oh, they're paying for 15 sales seats, but only 9 of them have been assigned. And sometimes that's just because, there was a promo on and they bought more seats than they needed, and it's fine that those seats aren't used. Other times, people just won't even realize it and say, oh, yeah, it would be great if we could have, an extra 3 or 4 people with access to sequences, or, without HubSpot branding on their meetings pages, and boom, done. And the only thing that preventing them was that they hadn't assigned those people a seat. Also, if I ask, hey, how many people are on your sales team? And they say 3, and I see that there are 10 assigned sales professional seats, I'm also going to ask the question there. Be like, do we need to rebalance the number of seats that we might be paying for? The other place that people commonly, I love it when people have teams set up, but this is an example of where maybe teams aren't super necessary, in that this list goes on for about 7 more locations, but we've got teams with 1 person, 1 person, 1 person, 1 person, no people, and 1 person. So if you have a 1-person team, or you have nobody on a team, that team isn't adding a whole lot of value. So either removing those teams, or potentially, reorganizing the way the team structure might look to be something more reasonable. Like this client, these folks were all community managers for various locations. So I was like, maybe we have a community managers team that presents and manages stuff that's useful to all community managers, rather than having all the community managers separated out onto their own 1-person teams. So users and teams, something to keep in mind. Again, a bit more of an art than a science when it comes to figuring out whether something is or isn't a problem, but definitely something that warrants a look at. And I apparently left a unformatted slide in there. I'll make sure I delete that for the next go round. That brings us into objects and properties. So I am just going to stop the share for just a half second, just so I can check the chat. Oh, okay, sweet. We have also seen a few other folks show up in there. So hey, Grace, Heaven, Holden, Monica, Rebecca, thanks for popping in. We're super glad to have you guys. I hope dropping in midstream into what I was talking about, into some of the top level issues, wasn't too disorienting for you, but thank you so much for joining. Feel free. Thanks, Monica. Oh yeah, nice to meet you, Corey. Nice to see you again, Grace. Okay, awesome. Well then, what I'm going to do is I will get the share going again, since it sounds like things are ticking along pretty well, and we'll dive into objects and properties. Share entire screen. Share. Perfect. So, objects and properties. This is where things really start to get messy, and where I have most of my fun when I'm playing around with HubSpot. So, a property audit. This isn't a single thing there isn't a single approach to doing this. Again, this is another one of those areas that's more art than science. But I'm going to show you guys a couple of quick tips of how I go about identifying properties that might be causing issues, or properties that we might not need in a HubSpot account anymore. I'm just going to make sure. Yeah. Okay. So again, we're going to hop off to my trusty dusty HubSpot account. And I'm just going to go, again, we're in settings. We're going to look at data management, properties. And here's all the properties that I've got. So I know in the slide I said there's about 190 custom property or default properties that come with contacts in HubSpot. That depends on your HubSpot tier, because again, I'm using a lower tier than most of you guys probably are. I'm closer to about 160. But for most HubSpot Pro accounts, you're looking at about 190 properties. So with that in mind, that's the first place to check. If you check in your account and you're like, oh, we've only got 210 custom properties. Congratulations, you haven't created a lot of properties, so you probably don't have a lot of custom properties that could be causing you issues. If you, on the other hand, have 420 custom properties on your contact object, you have created a lot of properties. And there's probably a case to be made for having fewer and getting rid of some of those. So how do you go about doing it? I'm actually going to jump over to look. Perfect. Is used in. And remember used in, because we're going to come back to this a little bit later for some other things beyond properties. You can sort used in by most used to least used. And what used in tells you is what is this field actually used in? So you can see right now in our internal account, we've only got 178 companies, and we've got, some stuff to sort people's billable rates, the average time it took them to become a customer, et cetera, et cetera. But if, say, this property was used in a workflow, or is a dynamic token or a personalization token in an email or on a landing page or in a form, or this is just used as part of your website forms, this used in category is going to list all of the HubSpot assets that are referencing this property. And the reason this is significant is because I can't archive a property if it's being used in anything. So if I find, this is one of the first stops I make when looking at a HubSpot account, because based on what has been used a lot, that's usually what I can tell the most important data to that company or organization is. But on the flip side, if I zip down and I go, this has been created by somebody other than HubSpot, and it's used in nothing, that might be a case of, oh, that's a field we might be able to remove. So let's look at my own tools used field here. So you can see, this is something we've been thinking about doing, of saying, so we could look at our clients and say, hey, which one of them uses HubSpot chat flows? Which one uses HubSpot meetings? Which one has the Salesforce account, the Salesforce sync installed? So that if we see a change about HubSpot meetings or HubSpot chat flows or the Salesforce integration, we'd know who to email or who that might be of interest to. But we haven't started doing that yet because there's no values. And if we go back to basic info, it's going to show us 0 out of 178 companies have a value for this property. So if I were my own client, I'd be being like, hey, how realistic is it that we're going to get around to using this tools used property? If I told myself, no, totally, next week we're going to start using it, great, then you get to keep it. But if you're like, I'd be like, okay, well, we can get it out of there. And maybe we recreate a different version of it if you actually get around, to doing that initiative. So realistically, this idea of just being aware of how many properties you have in your account, who's been doing that, creating those properties, and what those properties are used in, and what they, how many of them actually have data in them. Triangulating amongst those 4 things is really one of the most valuable things that I do as far as getting a sense of where some problems might be. Because again, one really common scenario is the country. So if I go into some of my clients and I search country, there'll be 4 different country fields. There'll be a drop down that was created by Salesforce. There'll be a single line of text. And then there'll be a place where they put the country for phone numbers or something like that. So if I see issues or if I find places where data across fields doesn't match, I immediately come back into the properties and figure out, okay, what's the issue? Is it that these are, that we've just created these things separately and right hand didn't know what the left hand was doing? Is it the fact that we needed to have a drop down for one situation, but we needed to have a single line of text for another situation? Those are all the conversations that come out of this. But as far as initial diagnosis, just looking at where the fields are, what they're used by, how many people have data and who created them, it's going to get you really far in terms of figuring out what some issues in the account might be. Original sources. This is one such property that gives me a lot of insight, and I hope momentarily you a lot of insight as well. Actually, sorry, I want to go to my dashboards. So, original source is a HubSpot default field, and there's a lot of different original source options. Let's actually just see. Can I filter that? Source is any of organic search, paid search, email marketing, organic social, referrals, other campaigns, direct traffic, offline sources, and paid social. So this is automatically populated by HubSpot for every contact that enters your database. Everybody will have an original source. For organic search, paid search, email marketing, basically everything other than offline sources typically means that they converted on your website in some way. So I often, as a first stop, will check and see, just for my own interest, what's the split in somebody's database of people created by offline sources, which means an integration, an import, a manual creation using the HubSpot Outlook plugin, versus people who have actually converted, which is going to mean organic social, direct traffic, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Because that tells me, what are the different paths people are taking into the database? Sometimes I see ones that are like 95% of the contacts are offline sources, which means, all right, they're probably importing or getting added by an integration most of the database. If I see that it's, 90% not offline, I'm like, wow, they've got a really good organic pipeline that's bringing people in via conversions on the website. And the reason that that's significant is because, generally speaking, people that come from offline sources, we can't see their website activity. Because they were added by an import, an integration from the sales plugin, basically sources that don't match the person to an IP address, we don't get that website matching. So a lot of times people will look at a contact. Let's take a look right here. Like Rick here. They'll be looking at a contact and they'll be like, man, I know that Rick visited the website. Why isn't it showing up on my in his activity? And then again, I look at the offline sources and I'm like, oh, well, offline sources, somebody Lisa Latour just manually added Rick to the database. Rick never converted on your website. So we never had an IP address to match to that cookie to give you that insight into his actual activity on your website. So again, it's not a problem. This isn't an issue per se. It's just a reality of the database that it pays to understand when you're trying to answer other questions. And that if the person you're talking to doesn't have a great handle on, can really bring a lot of insight. So pop back over. So original sources, definitely worth checking and being aware of. Record layouts. Yeah, okay, perfect. That's my next three there. I'll touch on all of these in one fell swoop. Record layouts. What I mean by that is just the sidebars. So I haven't actually edited my sidebar layouts much. But for example, I don't use tickets in my HubSpot account. So there's really no reason to have tickets on the right-hand sidebar over here. It's just visual clutter. Now, for me, I'm a HubSpot power user. It's not a big deal. But for some less sophisticated HubSpot users, eliminating any source of distraction can be a net benefit. It just makes the system seem much less overwhelming. And it is as simple as going settings, objects, contacts, record customization, and then there's options here for customizing both the right and left sidebars. Allows you to add certain fields that you want everybody to see, allows you to remove elements from the sidebar that they might not need on a day-to-day basis. And if you go up to higher HubSpot tiers like Pro and above, you can change this around for teams. You could say, oh, the customer service team needs access to tickets, but not deals. The sales team needs access to deals, but not tickets. Let's adjust that visibility for both of those options. And same thing on the left sidebar. As you go up, you can make certain sections conditional. So you could have the custom, the account type or the customer type field in your view, and then say, oh, if the customer type is customer or former customer, show a completely separate block of fields that might be useful or required for that particular customer type. So again, just knowing that you can and probably should do at least some level of customization based on what your users actually, need to see on a day-to-day basis in HubSpot. Company association, another element of the contact and company relationship, which a lot of people don't realize. So again, if we go settings, objects, companies, this little tick box right here has created and saved people so much hassle. Create and associate companies with contacts. The default behavior in HubSpot is to, when somebody gets added to the database, a new contact gets added, HubSpot scans their email address and tries to find a company in its nigh infinite database of companies that matches that email domain, and then automatically create that company. So if we take just like a real practical example, when we added, Zoe Flaxbeard here, steadyrain.com, we didn't actually go in and create the company Steady Rain manually. We just added Zoe. HubSpot recognized the email address, created the company based on information that it scraped from the web. But a lot of times, people don't realize that's happening. And so they're creating companies and, creating duplicate companies or, or they're just wondering like actively, it's like, oh, I didn't create 175 companies in the database. Where did those actually come from? And sometimes this can create an issue like, say, a university. I'll say University of Oregon. There are a lot of faculties with Oregon, but they all use the same I'm just going to say it's uoregon.edu email address. So if you're an educational, software provider or a textbook provider or something like that, you in your mind might think of the Department of, Computer Science, the Department of Math, the Department of Arts, the Department of Theater. Those might all be different customers to you. But to HubSpot, those are all at the same domain name. So in HubSpot's mind, it's all going to be created on one account. So you might find yourself with companies set up in a certain way to meet your needs. And then HubSpot is going kind of, off script and creating its own little universe of companies. And a lot of times it just comes back to the fact that this is the default setting and nobody was aware of it. Nobody turned it off, or somebody turned it off and it didn't intend to be turned off. So if you're ending up with any issues of like, where are my companies coming from? Why aren't they looking the way that I want them to? A lot of times that little checkbox can be the culprit. Yeah. Last but not least, on the on kind of objects and properties is lifecycle stage setting. This is another one that there is a common scenario. So again, settings, data management, contacts, lifecycle stage. This is great because now, unlike last year, or something like I think 4 or 5 months ago, they added the ability to add different lifecycle stages, which is awesome. We've added the former customer lifecycle stage. But this right here, sync lifecycle stages and the default behavior for when different things happen, super important to be aware of, because this is saying, and it's the default behavior, that if you set the lifecycle stage of a company, it pushes the lifecycle stage down to all of the associated contacts. And you might not want that to happen. Again, let's go back to our university example of you've decided that University of Oregon is a customer because, yep, you're doing business with the Department of Theater now, but somebody comes in from the Department of Science, and you don't want them to necessarily become a customer or be flagged as a customer because that person is potentially a new lead. So if you have sync lifecycle stages on, what's happening to your company is pushing down automatically to all of the contacts. And because lifecycle stage is used really commonly as a trigger or an indicator of where people are in their buyer's journey, having that changed in a way that you weren't aware that it was being changed can be really consequential for people's marketing initiatives. Same thing also happens here. If you want the first step in your lifecycle stage process to be subscriber, or what I've called lead, or you wanted people to come in as qualified lead, or anyway, basically, if these defaults, which you could change or turn off, are automatically setting people to lifecycle stages different than the ones that you wanted or expected when certain thresholds are crossed, again, it can cause a lot of headache for your marketing processes. So just being aware that do you want to sync, and is that happening? And do the actions that are happening by default line up with what you actually want to have happen with your lifecycle stages? This can be a really common process when it comes to if people are like, why do I have fewer or more MQLs than I thought I would? Or why do I have so many opportunities? And I'm not setting anybody to opportunity with my workflows. But HubSpot might in the background. Okay, I'm going to jump back to my presentation. Perfect. Okay, as those of you who know me are unsurprised, I have put in more content than I have time to get to. Oh, awesome. I'm just going to get myself. Oh, hey. Hi, Eric and Natalia. Thanks, Holden, for letting me know. If one would like to clean up the properties and objects, data model in order to find. Yes, if one would like to clean up the properties and objects, would you recommend? Yeah, I would absolutely recommend. Yeah, a data model is a great thing, actually, Sammy. And sorry, I'm gonna answer Sammy's question because I think this is useful for everybody. And I promise when I send out the deck, it'll have some of the stuff that I'm not going to have a chance to get to, and maybe I'll sneak it in on a subsequent user group setting. But Sammy, yeah, what I usually do is I'll actually start with HubSpot's native features. I'm going to make sure my entire screen again. Share. I'm going to jump back into my HubSpot account. If we go properties. So a lot of times I'll just start with the old export all properties. And this will give me an export of all the properties that exist in my database and all the stuff that they're used in. It doesn't, unfortunately, show us where how many people have data in each one of those properties, but I will just use this as my go-to. And a lot of times I'll look in and I'll find, enable editing. Where did I want that? Yes, and then filter by, because you can't delete filters, properties created by HubSpot. So I'll just filter out HubSpot. I'll leave the fields created by somebody else. I'll look at the things that are used in and potentially the groups. And then I'll just start flagging, and I'll use this universally recognized color scenario of like, hey, yellow stuff, that I think that's worth talking about. Red stuff, I think that's we should absolutely purge. The green stuff, this is what I think we should keep. And then I'll check my own account, reports, data management, data model. I've never actually looked at it in my own account before. I'm going to skip the tour right here. And then you can use the data model in here to see kind of how those, the connections between all of the objects. This frankly becomes more useful when you've got custom objects in place in a larger HubSpot account, because then there can be some genuine confusion about, tickets connect to jobs, but contacts don't connect to jobs. And then, using both the data model, going through here and seeing, what fields do I have on this? What fields do I have over here? This is how this object connects together. Can be a really useful exercise. But for default HubSpot accounts, my experience is people have a pretty good handle on how the objects talk to each other and how the relationships between those work. It really does more come down to the fact of just kind of the grunt work of saying, hey, look, because we created all of those registration forms for our customer appreciation event 2 years ago, and that meant we created 17 new properties just to ask people whether they wanted chicken or fish. That's usually where I start, early stages with trying to help people get a handle on their property databases. Okay, currently one of our requirement has tracking initial contact. Note text field. The issue we have is that this is repeated for form sends or old contact that reconvert a new one. Kept on our form so that the dead. Yeah, that's actually really good question there, Holden. So basically what Holden is saying is that they have a field which is capturing some of that kind of unstructured notes data, but it's getting overwritten. If in additional submissions write that, so is there? The better way, obviously, or not obviously, but a better way would be using the actual notes object that's part of the timeline. But I totally understand you can't automatically create those via workflow, and that is a bit of a manual process. So there's no append to option, which I would love it if they had in multi-line text, the ability to just append content into a notes field. That would be awesome. Sometimes what I'll do, Holden, is I'll actually suggest, if people will have, depending on how often and how frequently those submissions happen, you could have a previous text or a previous notes field or first notes field or whatever. And then with a not terribly complicated set of workflows, you can basically say, hey, if this contains data, copy the data from here over to there, usually with a wait condition. So something of hey, if they've submitted a form that has the notes field, wait 5 minutes, check to see if there's data in the original field. If there is, copy it to the secondary field. And then now you still run into limits with that, because you kind of have to ask yourself, how many potential submissions do we want to log back in the history? And if you're getting back past 3 or 5 historical submissions that you're looking at, then you probably need to look at another situation. But yeah, for simple, and apologies, I'm just kind of freewheeling here to wind us down. But short answer, there probably is a better way. It likely involves copying data from one field to another with a workflow, or pivoting to use the actual notes object inside HubSpot, even though that might involve a little bit more manual effort. All right, cool. I know folks are starting to have to jump because we are absolutely coming to time. So what I am going to say is thank you all for joining me for this. This is, like I said, the inaugural Western Canada HubSpot user group. So no matter where you joined from, I really appreciate you guys taking the time to spend it with me. I am super glad that everything seemed to work from a technical standpoint today. So this is being recorded. I will absolutely get this out to all of you and anybody else who didn't register. But yeah, spread the word. Keep an eye out for our next sessions. Feel free to look me up on LinkedIn, because that's where I always post about where things are coming. And you guys have yourself a wonderful day and or evening, right, Sammy? Because it's evening for a lot of you folks. All right, guys.